Saturday mornings in my neighborhood usually mean quiet yards, the soft hum of lawnmowers, and the occasional jogger with earbuds in. For me, it was finally the day I decided to solve a problem that had been eating away at me for weeks. My backyard, pool, my own private retreat, had somehow become the local water park for one entitled family. Despite fences, gates, and polite warnings, the intrusions never stopped. So that morning, armed with my toolbox and a brand new smart lock system, I decided today was the day to put an end to it. The sun was warm, the cicadas were buzzing, and I could almost hear the lock clicking in my head as a promise of peace. I crouched by the gate, setting up the keypad, measuring twice before drilling holes. I kept thinking, this isn't just about privacy, this is about safety, liability, respect. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I just wanted what was mine to remain mine. Of course, peace never lasts long when you have a Karen next door. As I was tightening the last screw, a shadow fell across the gate. I turned, and there he was, Karen's teenage son, smirking like he'd caught me doing something wrong. He leaned lazily on the fence and raised an eyebrow. What's this? Building a fortress now? His voice dripped with sarcasm. I ignored him at first, but he pushed on. You know, everyone uses this pool. You're not really gonna lock it, right? I stood up, brushing dust off my hands. Actually, yes. This is my property, and I'm installing a lock to make sure it stays that way. His face twisted, and for a split second, I saw the same self-righteous smugness his mother always carried. Without another word, he stormed off toward his house, muttering something about me being pathetic. I shook my head, trying to brush it off. Kids throw tantrums. That's what they do. I went back to work, sliding the final panel into place, and listening to the satisfying click of the mechanism locking into position. Finally, control. Finally, peace. Or so I thought. Not 10 minutes later, I heard the sound no homeowner wants on a quiet Saturday, the shrill rise of police sirens. My stomach dropped. By the time I made it to the front gate, red and blue lights were flashing against the trees, and standing proudly at the edge of my driveway, pointing like he'd just uncovered a crime, was Karen's son. The sight was almost surreal. 2 officers stepping out of their car, adjusting their belts, walking toward me like I'd just been caught committing a felony. Meanwhile, Karen's son puffed out his chest as if he'd single-handedly brought justice to the neighborhood. There he is, the kid shouted, pointing at me with dramatic flair. He's blocking off community property. You need to arrest him. The officers exchanged glances but kept their faces neutral. One of them, a tall man with tired eyes, addressed me directly. Sir, we got a call about a dispute over property. This young man says you're putting a lock on shared facilities. Can you explain? I felt my jaw clench. This isn't shared property. This is my private pool. My name is on the deed. The land is mine, and so is everything on it. Before I could go on, Karen's son interrupted with the kind of smug confidence only teenagers and Karen seem to possess. No, everyone knows it's community property. My mum says the HOA bylaws are clear. He can't just lock it up. The officers held up their hands, trying to keep the situation calm. I took a deep breath, went inside, and came back out holding a thick folder. Here, I said firmly, spreading out documents across the hood of their cruiser. This is the property survey. This is the purchase agreement. And here's a letter from the HOA itself stating the pool is private. One officer scanned the papers while the other kept an eye on Karen's son, who was fidgeting now, realizing his little stunt might not go as planned. The officer looked up at me and nodded slowly. Everything here checks out. Looks like the pool is private property after all. The smugness drained from the kid's face, but only for a moment. He crossed his arms and muttered, "We'll see what my mom has to say." The words hung heavy in the air. I knew what was coming. If the kid was dramatic, his mother was a full-blown performer. It didn't take long. Within minutes, the front door next door burst open, and Karen herself stormed out like a one-woman hurricane. Blonde bob bouncing, cardigan flapping, and voice already raised before she even reached the property line. "What is the meaning of this?" she screeched, wagging her finger in the air like she was conducting an orchestra of outrage. The officers turned, clearly bracing themselves. Karen marched right up, ignoring them completely, and planted herself in front of me. "How dare you undermine the community spirit with your selfishness? A locked pool. Do you think this is a prison yard?" Her theatrics drew the attention of neighbors peeking through blinds and stepping onto porches. Karen thrived on an audience, and now she had one. I tried to stay calm. "Karen, this is my property, my pool. I have every right to secure it." She gasped, clutching her chest like I'd insulted her entire family tree. "You don't own water. You don't own sunshine. This pool belongs to everyone who cares about this neighborhood." Her son chimed in. "It's a safety hazard anyway. People could get trapped in there." The officers stepped in, trying to calm things down. "Ma'am, we've reviewed the documents. The pool is private. Your son's call was misguided." But Karen wasn't listening. She paced back and forth, waving her arms, accusing me of ruining community trust. "What's next? A drawbridge? Barbed wire? You're turning this neighborhood into a war zone." Her dramatics would have been funny if they weren't so infuriating. I felt my patience snapping. Karen, enough, the pool is mine. The discussion is over. The officers, sensing the escalation, gently guided Karen back toward her property. One leaned close and whispered to me, "Document everything. She's not going to let this go." And they were right. Karen stormed off, her voice carrying down the street, vowing, "This isn't over. You'll regret this." By evening, I'd finally finished installing the smart lock. The keypad lit up with a soft blue glow, and when I heard that electronic click, I felt like I'd reclaimed a piece of my life. For the first time in weeks, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset, actually feeling at peace. But peace never lasts long with Karen. Around midnight, the motion sensor by the pool beeped. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera feed. Sure enough, there he was, Karen's son, sneaking through the yard like a clumsy cat burglar. He marched up to the gate, tugged on it, and when it wouldn't budge, he kicked it hard enough to rattle the fence. Then, unbelievably, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. I shook my head in disbelief. The audacity was staggering, but this time, I was ready. I queued up the video feed, already prepared for the inevitable confrontation. 10 minutes later, the familiar red and blue glow filled the street again. The officers stepped out of their car looking weary, like they'd been through this rodeo before, and right on cue, Karen appeared, this time in a silk robe, hair in rollers, slippers slapping against the pavement. She stormed into my yard, shouting before she even reached the gate, "Arrest him. He's endangering children. He's violating HOA law." The officers sighed and looked at me. "Do you have anything to show us, sir?" Smiling, I held up my phone. "Actually, I do." I pressed play, and the video lit up the small screen. There was Karen's son, clearly visible, sneaking into my yard, shaking the gate, and finally kicking it in frustration. His face was unmistakable, his actions undeniable. The officers leaned in, nodded, and then turned toward him. "Son, is this you?" His bravado evaporated. He stammered, eyes darting between his mother and the officers. I was just checking. For safety," Karen exploded. "Don't you dare talk to him like that. He's a good boy. He was only doing what the HOA should have done." But this time, the officers weren't swayed. "Ma'am, your son trespassed onto private property and damaged a gate. That's not safety, that's vandalism." Karen's face turned red and she stomped her foot. "This is harassment. We demand justice." The taller officer shook his head. "Justice is exactly what this is. One more incident like this, and charges will be filed. Do you understand?" Karen looked like she was about to combust, but her son tugged her sleeve, whispering frantically. Finally, she deflated, muttering under her breath as the officers made their warning clear. For the first time, the power had shifted. After that night, things were different. Karen no longer stormed across the lawn with her finger wagging. Her son no longer strutted around like he owned the place. The pool stayed quiet, the smart lock clicking shut each evening with a sense of finality. But the victory wasn't just in keeping them out, it was in standing my ground. HOA bullies thrive on intimidation, on making people doubt themselves. The moment you draw a clear line and enforce it, their power crumbles. Sure, Karen still shot me daggers when we crossed paths at the mailbox. Sure, her son still muttered under his breath when mowing the lawn. But the days of trespassing and entitlement were over. As I sat on my porch swing one evening, watching the last rays of sun reflect off the now peaceful pool, I realized something. Sometimes the best weapon against HOA tyranny isn't shouting or fighting. Sometimes it's simply outsmarting them. And that smart lock, best investment I ever made. So if you've ever dealt with a neighbor who thinks your life is theirs to control, take it from me. Stand your ground, know your rights, and don't be afraid to hit lock.